Ma'am, the service entrance is around back. This door is for official use only. Officer Leonard Briggs planted himself in the center of the City Hall entrance like he had been placed there by a higher authority. Both arms out. One hand raised. The kind of gesture that is performed for the crowd as much as it is performed for the person it is aimed at. The woman he was blocking was 47 years old, dressed in a gray wool coat, standing on the marble steps of the Mitchell County City Hall with a leather portfolio under her left arm and her right hand extended to push through a door she had every legal right to walk through. She lowered her hand. She did not raise her voice. She looked at Officer Briggs the way you look at something when you have been waiting for it and are not surprised. "I have business here," she said. "Everybody's got business." Briggs smiled at the man standing beside him, a younger officer named Garrett, who had been on the job 11 weeks. The smile was the kind that requires a witness. "Service entrance is around back. You'll be taken care of. I was asked to use this entrance." "By who?" "By the Chief of Staff to the Governor's office." Briggs tilted his head the way someone tilts their head when they've heard a joke that isn't quite funny enough. "Listen, sweetheart, I don't have time for the whole story. I've got a ceremony to secure in about 45 minutes. If you've got business here, you go round back, you check in, and they will get you sorted. That's how it works." The woman said nothing for 3 seconds. She was counting. Not violations, not statutes. She was counting, because she had learned in 47 years that the 3 seconds between what you want to say and what you choose to say is where your dignity lives. What Officer Leonard Briggs did not know, what nobody in that entryway knew except the woman herself, was that the ceremony he had just told her she was interrupting was the ceremony she was the subject of. That in 43 minutes, inside this building, in a room she had helped renovate during her second term as state senator, a Chief Justice was going to administer an oath to her, that the portfolio under her arm contained the remarks she had spent 11 days writing. That her name was Diane Elaine Whitmore. That as of 11:15 this morning, she was going to be the governor of the state of Georgia. He had no idea, and in 43 minutes, the doors of this building were going to open, and the woman he had just called sweetheart and pointed toward the service entrance was going to walk out of them as the most powerful elected official in the state. But this story doesn't start here. Rewind 6 years. Diane Whitmore was the daughter of a woman named Vera, who had cleaned offices on the overnight shift in Atlanta for 22 years, and a man named Harold, who had driven a city bus on the 49 Macon route and known every regular by name. They were both gone now, Vera at 71, Harold at 68, both before they got to see the part of the story that mattered most. Diane kept a letter her mother had written her on the night before her first state senate race. It was 2 paragraphs in Vera's careful handwriting on a piece of notepaper with a blue flower in the corner. She still had it. She had read it the night before every election since. She had been a state senator for 14 years, representing the 9th District, the district where she had grown up, where she had gone to public school, where she had watched the library get its funding cut 3 times and had spent her first term fighting to get it restored. She had chaired the Committee on Public Safety. She had co-authored the state's first comprehensive use of force accountability legislation. She knew what was in that legislation. She knew what was in every piece of legislation she had ever touched. She had a memory that her staff described, privately and with genuine awe, as architectural. She did not merely remember things. She stored them in relation to each other, in structures, so that everything was connected to everything else and could be retrieved instantly. She had won the gubernatorial election by 6 points. She had campaigned in all 159 counties. She had shaken hands in county seats where her name was not on a single lawn sign, and she had spoken with clarity and without apology about what she believed and what she intended to do. She had won because she was right, and she was ready, and she had worked for it without stopping for 14 years. This morning, she had woken up at 4:47. She had made coffee. She had sat at her kitchen table and read her mother's letter one more time. Then, she had put the letter in the inside pocket of her portfolio, close to the remarks she had written. She had driven herself to City Hall. She had stopped in the parking lot for 4 minutes, alone in the quiet, and she had thought about Vera and Harold and the 49 Macon bus and the library and everything that was connected to everything else. Then, she had gotten out of the car and walked toward the entrance. Officer Leonard Briggs had been with the Mitchell County Sheriff's Department for 6 years. He had been assigned to City Hall security details for the past 2. He was considered reliable. His lieutenant described him as a team player. He had 3 complaints in his file. 2 for failure to follow procedure. 1 for language used during a routine stop in 2021. All 3 had been reviewed. All 3 had been closed. The 2021 complaint had been reviewed by a supervisor who had served with Briggs's uncle for 11 years. These things were connected, in the way that these things are always connected. Briggs had been briefed on the ceremony. He had the guest list. He had a photograph packet of the principals. He had been told the governor-elect would be arriving between 9:30 and 10:00. It was 9:44. He had not looked at the photograph. On the steps of City Hall, a man in a catering uniform was watching from behind a cart near the side door. He had been there for 20 minutes. He had his phone in his pocket, and he was not sure whether to take it out. A woman in a red blazer was walking past on the sidewalk, saw what was happening, slowed, and kept walking with the particular speed of someone who doesn't want to know. A teenager on a bicycle had stopped across the street and was watching without pretense, simply watching, the way teenagers watch things when they haven't yet learned to perform, not caring. Garrett, the 11-week officer, was looking at his clipboard. He had heard the woman say the words Chief of Staff and Governor's Office, and something had flickered in him. He looked at his clipboard. He looked at the photograph packet clipped to the back. "I'm going to need to ask you to step aside," Briggs said. He had moved closer. 2 feet, maybe less. "We've got an event, and I can't have civilians at this entrance." "I am not a civilian," Diane said. "I am the governor-elect of the state of Georgia. My name is Diane Whitmore. I am on your list." Briggs made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "That's great. Really, and I'm the Secretary of State. If you've got credentials, you can present them at the back entrance, and they will verify your identity, and then someone will escort you. That's the process. I'd like your name and badge number." "Ma'am, your name. And your badge number." The smile had left Briggs's face. He straightened slightly. "Officer L. Briggs, Mitchell County Sheriff's Department. And I'm going to need you to step back from this door." "Officer Briggs." Diane's voice had not changed pace or pitch once since she had walked up the stairs. "I'd like you to look at the photograph packet on your clipboard." Garrett made a small sound. He was already looking at it. The color left Briggs's face before Diane finished her sentence. Garrett said quietly, to nobody in particular, "Oh no, 38 minutes." Inside City Hall, a woman named Rosalind Okafor was standing at the window of the Deputy Chief of Staff's office, watching the steps. Rosalind had been Diane Whitmore's chief campaign strategist for 4 years, and her Deputy Chief of Staff for the last 8 months, and she had a gift for reading a situation from a distance that was not magic, but was close to it. She read this situation in about 4 seconds. Then she picked up her phone. She called the sheriff. She called the mayor's office. She called the head of City Hall security. She made all 3 calls inside 90 seconds. Then she set her phone down and went back to the window, where she watched Officer Briggs standing very still on the steps of City Hall, with the photograph packet in his hand and the expression of a man who has just understood, all at once, every decision he made in the last 4 minutes. Outside, Garrett had moved to open the door. Diane did not move toward it immediately. "Officer Briggs," she said, "I want to make sure I've understood what just happened here." Briggs was holding the photograph packet. He was looking at it. He was trying to find somewhere to put his eyes that was not the face of the woman in front of him. "You were briefed on this event," she said. "You had a guest list. You had photographs of the arriving principals. I arrived within the window you were given. I told you my name. I told you my position. I told you the Chief of Staff had directed me to this entrance. Governor-elect, I'm not finished." She said it without heat. She said it the way you say something, when you have thought about it for a long time and you are going to say it precisely and completely. In the course of the last 4 minutes, you blocked entry to a public official, used demeaning language in a public setting, and declined to consult documentation that was on your person. I want to make sure that's all documented, not for my benefit. Because the next person you block at this door won't have a ceremony inside waiting for them. And they will deserve the same treatment I deserved. She looked at Garrett. "You looked at the packet," she said. Garrett nodded. His face was the face of a young man who was learning something important about what he was going to be in this profession. "That took courage," she said. "Remember that feeling." Then she walked through the door. 31 minutes later, Chief Justice Marion Aline administered the oath of office to Diane Elaine Whitmore in a room full of people who had waited for this for a long time in different ways. Vera's letter was in the inside pocket of the portfolio, next to Diane's heart, which was a thing she had not told anyone, and would not tell anyone, and knew anyway. Harold's face was in the room the way faces are in rooms, when the people who belong to them are gone, but the rooms are still full of what they gave you. The ceremony lasted 40 minutes. When it ended, the doors opened, and Governor Diane Whitmore walked out into the pale March light. Rosalind Okafor had spent the 31 minutes of the ceremony on the phone. By the time the doors opened, 4 things had already been set in motion. The footage from the City Hall security cameras was reviewed within an hour of the ceremony's conclusion. The catering worker who had watched from beside his cart had taken his phone out, finally, and filmed approximately 40 seconds of the exchange. He posted it without caption. The post had 60,000 views by the time the governor's inaugural address aired on local news at noon. By the following morning, it had been viewed by 9 million people. A number of those people recognized certain specific phrases. One of them contacted the woman who had filed the 2021 complaint against Officer Briggs. That woman's attorney, who had been working the case pro bono and had hit a series of procedural walls, received a phone call at 8:00 a.m. from the new governor's legal counsel. The call lasted 7 minutes. The attorney described it afterward as the most efficient call she had ever received from a government office. Leonard Briggs was placed on administrative leave that afternoon. He was suspended, without pay pending the completion of a formal review. He did not speak to the press. His union issued a statement describing the incident as a miscommunication and expressing confidence in the review process. The review process did not share the union's confidence. The review found that Briggs had been given a photograph packet, that the packet contained a current photograph of the governor-elect, and that the packet had not been opened until the 11-week officer named Garrett opened it. The 3 prior complaints in Briggs's file were reopened and reviewed without the involvement of his lieutenant, whose connection to Briggs's uncle was now part of the record. The 2021 complaint, which involved language used during a traffic stop, was referred to a civil rights attorney. The woman who had filed that complaint had not stopped filing. She had filed twice more. All 3 cases were now consolidated under review by the State Attorney General's office. Briggs was terminated 14 weeks later, following the completion of the formal investigation. He appealed. The appeal was reviewed and denied. He is currently in civil litigation. He has not returned to law enforcement. The Mitchell County Sheriff's Department underwent a mandatory external audit of its complaint review process, the first in its history. The audit identified 17 cases from the previous 5 years in which complaints had been reviewed and closed by supervisors with personal connections to the officers involved. 14 of those cases were reopened. New procedures for complaint review were implemented that removed supervisors from reviews involving officers with whom they had personal relationships. The procedures were co-authored by a retired judge named Adaize Noosu, who had spent 11 years consulting on police accountability frameworks. Governor Whitmore appointed her to chair the new State Commission on Law Enforcement Standards 3 months after her inauguration. Officer Garrett submitted a written account of what he had witnessed to the formal review board. He was specific and he was accurate. His account matched the security footage on every point. He was not disciplined. He was counseled by a senior officer who told him that honesty under pressure was the mark of someone who would be trusted throughout a career. He is still with the department. He opened the photograph packet. He is the kind of officer who opens the photograph packet. The catering worker's name was Marcus Webb. He was 26 years old and had been catering events at City Hall for 3 years. After the video went to 9 million views, he received a message from a journalism student at Georgia State who wanted to interview him about what he had seen. He agreed. He said, "I wasn't sure if I should take it out. I took it out anyway. I'm glad I did." He went back to work the next day. He didn't want anything. He just wanted to have been someone who did something. The woman in the red blazer who walked past and kept walking sent an email to the governor's public contact address 3 days after the ceremony. It was 2 sentences long. It said, "I walked past. I've been thinking about it ever since. I'm sorry." The email was received and logged by a member of the communications staff. It was not answered directly, but the governor mentioned it in a speech the following month without identifying the sender. She said, "Accountability isn't just institutional. Sometimes it's 2 sentences and the willingness to say I should have stopped." At her first press conference as governor, Diane Whitmore was asked directly about what had happened on the steps of City Hall. She paused before answering. Not because she was uncertain, because she wanted to be precise. "I'm not going to describe what happened to me as unusual," she said. "That is the uncomfortable truth of this story. What happened to me on those steps happens to Black women in this state and in this country every day, in every kind of setting, at every level of public and private life. What was unusual is that I happened to be walking into a ceremony in my own honor. Most people aren't. Most people are just trying to get somewhere they have every right to be. I didn't tell Officer Briggs who I was when he first blocked the door. I let it go on for several minutes before I identified myself. I did that deliberately, not to extend my own discomfort. Because I wanted to see and to have documented what happens to someone at that door when they don't have a title to offer. What happens when all they have is the truth? What happens when the truth is not enough? The answer is in the footage. The answer is in 3 prior complaints that were closed without review. The answer is in the woman who filed those complaints twice more after the first one went nowhere. What I intend to do with this office, starting with the commission I am establishing and the audit currently underway, is change the architecture of the answer, not the surface of it. the structure. Because you cannot change outcomes without changing the systems that produce them. And I have been watching these systems my entire life. I know exactly where they need to change. She looked at the room. My mother cleaned offices in this city for 22 years. My father drove the 49 Macon bus for 19. Neither of them is here to see this. But everything I know about what this work is for came from watching them. I carry that with me into every room. I will carry it into every decision. That is not a sentiment. It is a policy. Diane Whitmore served the first year of her term with an approval rating that climbed steadily through each quarter. The State Commission on Law Enforcement Standards held its first formal hearing 4 months after her inauguration. Adaeze Nwosu presided. 22 officers and 4 supervisors were called to account in the first cycle of the new review process. 8 of them were terminated. 3 voluntarily resigned before their hearings concluded. Rosalind Okafor was appointed Chief of Staff. She kept the same window in her office. On the morning of the governor's first 100 days, she stood at it for a moment before the briefing started and thought about the steps below. Then she turned around and went to work. Garrett remained with the Mitchell County Sheriff's Department. He was assigned a field training officer who had been with the department for 19 years and was known for 2 things: being scrupulous about documentation and opening the packet. Garrett was 26 years old. He was going to be fine. Vera Whitmore's letter stayed in the portfolio. Every night that the governor worked late in her office, and there were many, she would sometimes take it out and read the 2 paragraphs in her mother's careful handwriting. She would fold it back. She would put it away. She would keep going. Outside the window of her office, the city she had grown up in went on being the city it had always been. Better in some places, unchanged in others, in the middle of changing in the rest. The work was not finished. It was never finished. That was the point. Somewhere on Route 49, a bus was running its route. Someone had to be watching. If Diane Whitmore's story stayed with you, the letter in the portfolio, the 3 seconds between what you want to say and what you choose to say, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Stories like this don't spread because an algorithm decides. They matter. They spread because we decide. Drop a comment below. Have you ever been dismissed before you had a chance to speak? What did it take to stay composed, and what did it cost you? We want to hear from you, because your experience is part of this story too. Subscribe for more stories that name what happened, document the system behind it, and honor the people who changed the architecture. Justice is built. Be part of what builds it.